Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, new paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week, Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. Welcome to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and we have a very interesting conversation today with a gentleman who is, well, we'll go ahead and stick with this particular title because we both like it. He refers to himself as a multi-hyphenated troublemaker. Oh, who are we talking about? We're talking about Andre, and it's Schabelman.
Yes, sir.
Welcome to Tell Me Your Story. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
It's fascinating. I just published my book back in September 2024. Your book's been out for a while as well. And we're going to go ahead and start at the top, so to speak, and talk a little bit about the novel that you've put together. But this novel, as with a lot of novels that some of my guests have written, it isn't just some kind of mystery or drama or love story. It's got a message in there. Talk to us about the story without. We don't want to give it away because we're going to give out your website so people can get a copy.
Sure. Well, I'd like to think of the book Captains Wanted, is what it's called, as an experience rather than necessarily a literary masterpiece, because actually you as the reader are put into the book in second person, and you are set off on a journey to discover, what it means to be the captain of your own ship and maybe how to do that. And so we follow along this character's journey, which is you, and you meander through life, going through ups and downs, hopefully in the end of the book, coming to a better idea of where your source of power and sovereignty might lie within.
Now, you use, as some of my guests do, the word sovereignty. I got the other words. I understand those. What do you mean by sovereignty?
I think sovereignty is more closely related to the idea that in life, in our society that we live in, we often unwillingly and unconsciously give away our own power to other people or systems or cultures or a variety of different things. And that in reality, in many cases, we're not fully in control of our own life and our own destiny. And the return back to that place where we can control our own lives and our own destiny is what I'd like to call our sovereignty.
Now, this is interesting about the title of the book, Captains Wanted. That almost speaks metaphysically and metaphorically to each one of us and our lives, in that That's kind of what each one of us are saying. But the reality is the answer to that question, if you will, or query is it's you. Not necessarily you, Andres, but
It's
me.
each of us.
To
Yeah.
each of us as an individual, I have to be the captain. But it seems to me in our day and age, there are a lot of people who are turning over the captaincy to somebody else. Now, I'm not necessarily speaking specifically of cults, but there are organizations that are kind of like that. They're going to tell you what to do, and you're just supposed to acquiesce. Do you see that much
Yeah.
in the world today?
I do. I do. And I think a lot of it comes really from the greatest fear of all, the fear of uncertainty, of our own death, of what's to come. And so we turn to people who give us clean, clear solutions to that quandary. And in that turning over the great unknown to someone who answers that question, we also give away our power. And we just live in a society where it's much easier, as a result of our intolerance of discomfort, to turn to a source that takes away some of that discomfort and makes us feel more at ease. And I would say that it's precisely in that discomfort, if we were to stay in it a little bit longer, and we would eventually show up in a place where those truths, however messy they might be, would be right there within us for ourselves and for our own lives.
Do you feel that the word responsibility, personal responsibility, is something that this book sort of speaks to? That it's not just being the captain. You know, they say the captain, if the ship is sinking, the captain goes down with the ship. Or at the very least, the captain is the last one off the boat.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think responsibility is interesting because there are ways in which responsibility itself is often part of the challenge of returning back your own power, because a lot of that concept of responsibility was often established by the parental structure we grew in and whatnot. But I do think there is a place where we eventually land where we have responsibility for our own lives, and in turn, as a result of that kind of inner questioning, we do end up seeing the similarities that exist between our own journey and those that others are on. And we therefore then turn up for others in responsible ways as well.
What led you to write this novel? Because I think of authors like James Redfield, who wrote The Celestine Prophecy. And I love
Mm.
many of the symbols, the metaphors, and so forth within the book. They're very profound. What about you? I mean, that's it. It sounds to me like that's kind of where you're going with this novel, because people like to read stories. They love stories, and maybe I'm not going to say there's trickery of any kind here, okay? Because it's right out there in the open in black and white. But you're also
Right.
trying to convey a message.
That's right. Well, first of all, the title of the book, Captains Wanted, arose from the last words of my best friend right before he passed away from brain cancer 12 years ago. His dying words on his deathbed were, "I am the captain of this ship." And at various different points in my life, in many times, it's been because of failure and because of difficulty. I've turned to those words and looked into myself for the answers to whatever was going on around me. And as a result of that, and that process of coming back to myself, not looking to blame anyone else for the things that may have gone wrong or were challenges in my life, that I return back to that saying of, "I am the captain of the ship," that this is something that is happening for me to become a better captain of my own ship. And as I've done that, and I'm not saying I'm at the peak of my captaincy, let's be honest, but at least in that process, I have found that I wanted to give back a little bit of the blueprint that I followed, so that maybe it could resonate with someone else on their own journey.
How long did it take you to put this together? How long did it take you to get it published from the inception? Because my book, I started not knowing I was writing a book in 2001, and I only published it
Yeah,
a few months ago.
yeah. I know it took me a while too. Less than you, but what felt like a while, which was 5 years. Um, But I have to say that I was pretty thankful for those 5 years because a lot happened within that period that, I mean, even now when I read the book, it feels outdated because to me, because I feel like I keep evolving and growing and shifting.
Mm.
But for the period between 2019 and 2024, essentially, so many things obviously happened in the world and in my own life that, like, I'm thankful that I was able to allow the book to marinate a little bit in the process of writing.
Is this your first work, or have you others that are out there?
No, this is the first work that I've published. That's correct.
And do you feel the need or the urge to write more?
Hmm. I I don't know. I feel for sure the need to express creatively and to listen within to what is alive. So in this very specific moment, I don't necessarily see myself writing a book,
Hmm.
but I do continually express my creativity through writing, and that often then gets put in a work of art, like a comedic character that I might do online on my Instagram or in various different ways. But right now in this moment, I don't have a book in mind, but I think I'm very open to that changing because I do listen to what is alive inside of me and let that guide me. And that shifts a lot.
And with one other preliminary out of the way too, is it inaudible?
It's not yet. I was thinking about doing it though.
Well, then you and I will talk following the interview
Perfect.
because I produce them
Oh, great.
and narrate them too.
Oh,
Um,
sweet.
this is fascinating stuff because I love these stories, these books. I mean, my metaphysical primer was Autobiography of a Yogi, I should say, is.
Mm,
I've read the Celestine Prophecy, the 10th Insight, et cetera, and many others, where there is this wonderful story that's being shared. Tell us about the concepts of the story. I personally love being out on the water, so
yep.
I have no problem being my own captain in that
Yep.
respect. Um, I've never piloted a boat. I don't care
Mm.
how big or small. I've been out on a boat with someone else who's doing the driving. But it's just, there's just nothing like being out there on the open ocean, which I needed to live by. Didn't think it was going to be Santa Barbara, but hey, here I am.
There you are.
So the concept for being one's captain. Now, bear in mind, I understand too that a captain can be on an airplane or a train or some other
Hmm.
form of transport. But I don't know. I just get the idea that it's on a boat, for me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the cover of the book is certainly a boat, and I make a lot of maritime references inside of the novel.
Hmm.
It didn't have to be in the water, but I definitely leaned into it. That's how I interpreted my friend's last words, that it was about a captain on the ship in the water, and I think there is a theme in the book that we do return to, which is the power of nature. And any time that you've had any experiences on the water, whether on a boat or fishing, you sort of have to at some point make an homage or honor or surrender to the forces that be. And so it does feel quite appropriate for this book because at the end of the day, we can have these internal battles around finding our own sense of power and sovereignty and discernment and all that, but there is something larger in the book, which is about honoring the fact that we all form part of a larger balancing system that Mother Nature I guess, provides in a way. And you certainly feel those forces alive and well when you're in the middle of the ocean.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, all of the wonderful metaphors, the tides going in and out and the swells. And then, of course, all of the various creatures that live,
Mm-hmm.
down there, down there. Um, to me, it's one of those aspects that I think a lot of people have, metaphor. A lot of people, I find this fascinating. I understand this whole concept of propaganda slash misinformation. You want to call it fake news and all that kind of stuff. But metaphor and parable and all those kinds of other writing tools, they just really work for folks. Unfortunately, there are other folks who they just don't quite get it. You know, they don't quite understand that there's a message here. And you have to figure it out. And no one
Yep.
can tell you. No one can tell you, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I've been really attracted to those. I call them containers. They're ways in which our mind goes to hold ideas together. And I've always been attracted to containers that have less form to them, that allow people to step into their own truth as the container rather than have the words be specifically told to them with a specific meaning in mind. So the container of an analogy or a metaphor is really powerful. I also went down a path one time, which actually makes it into the book as a story, although it's a little bit of the truth has been stretched to make it more of a novel and a little bit more magical realism. But I went down the path early on in this process before I was writing the book, but in my own process of creating a perfume in Joshua Tree, actually.
Really?
Yeah. And I was really attracted to the idea of perfumes because what you smell is so different than what I smell because that scent is connected to your memory. It's connected to different ways that you're made up. Your molecules happen to be made up. And so I really like that idea of encouraging folks to have an experience that is their own. Because truly, yeah, we live in a world that seeks to define the world around us for us, but there's so many things and experiences out there that truly are inviting us to return back to our own truth.
Mm. And at the same time, a lot of folks have difficulty finding their own truth or what
Yeah.
that really. Let's do that. Let's define that. What is it meant by finding one's own truth, or what is one's own truth?
Right. I mean, it is going to be different for everyone, but I tend to think that if we were able to somehow strip away our survival mode instincts, our fears around our survival and our abundance and our fears around not being loved and being rejected, if we were to take away and we could get to the bottom of those fears and live from a place that was really from the place of possibility, from what our heart was really longing for to express and to move around in the world from a place of not from the place of where our minds have been usurped from the place of our fear, but from our possibility of what our heart wants to express. I feel like I have been able to feel a difference when it's my mind acting from the place of fear or my heart acting from a place of possibility and expression. And I think that I've determined that I know the words when they're coming out of my mouth, they have a certain feeling when they're coming from my heart versus when they're coming from my head. And similarly, as I navigate through the world, there's certain actions I take that feel more aligned with that same feeling of groundedness, of wholeness, of unity, of love, of my heart, as opposed to the actions that I take that come from my fear or the unknown and the scary. And those two feel so different for me now because I've exercised that muscle that I've learned to call that one that comes from my heart more associated with my truth.
Mm. Well, I know that one of the things that we discuss quite regularly on this program is just that, is getting to know you.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, what is, I believe it is the phrase, to thine own self be true,
That's what they say.
something like that. I like that. I like that. Just a matter of fact, yeah, that's what they say. It is fascinating though. It
Yeah.
really is, because one of the things that I've been going through in my life,
Yes.
for the better part of my life, has been personal growth and development.
Mm.
Some might use the word self help, but I prefer personal growth, because and in that is self help, if you will. That is.
Sure.
Um, I love George Carlin did this bit about self help. He says, "Yeah, what's self help? How is it that people go into a bookstore, into the self help section to read to get a book? Wait a minute, it's self help. What do you need somebody else to help you with? That kind of thing.
It's a good point.
I always thought that was rather humorous.
It's funny.
But the reality is that we are here with and for each other. I mean, I've used the analogy over and over again that if you, um, I'm trying to remember the analogy. It just escaped me. Um, if you don't take care of you, then how are you going to help anybody else?
Yeah,
And there's some real truth in that,
I
you
believe
know?
that. I think in my own process of returning to my truth, I've realized that one of the most tender, most vulnerable places has been allowing others in again. Because I think in some of my early childhood conditioning, that was the least safe space with
Mm,
others. But as I've worked through my own acceptance of loving and honoring the different parts of me in their truth, not as an expression of my idealized version of myself, but as the real version of who I am. As I've done that, I can't help but recognize that that process has led me to want to come back in connection to others and to show up for others in a way that has been unexpected. But I think it's been an interesting and essential part of my own self growth, which is that the more that I honor the different parts of myself with love and acceptance in their truth as they are, the more I show up with the desire to be seen by others and to show up for others with care and love and acceptance for them as well.
yeah. I believe they refer to that as like one of the first rules of a survival, is that you got to take care of you.
Radical self-reliance.
Yeah, exactly. And I have to say that there are days when I don't wanna. I mean, I'm burnout. It doesn't happen often, fortunately. But sometimes it just feels like I don't want to do anything more for anybody else. And at the same time, that word responsibility comes into mind.
Mm.
I have a responsibility to, uh, different people, to different organizations, and so on and so forth. And some days, yeah, it is easier than others to take that on. Do
Do you
you
think
find that the message comes through in that regard for you, about in your book,
mm.
Captains Wanted?
Well, but before I return back to my book on this matter, I wanted to say that yeah, I also feel those moments of responsibility, even in moments where I'm not necessarily capable of showing up for others. And I have to say that over time, I've learned, I think, that when I am showing up for others from the place of my own, like when I'm deprived of my own self energy, I'm actually not really showing up in my most responsible way anyway.
Yeah.
So there's a way in which caring for my own energy and, at times coming back to my own self and recharging my batteries as I do, and that then allows me to eventually, when I come out of that and I feel recharged, to then really do give back in a way that really benefits others as well. So like I can't actually be responsible truly if I'm not caring for my own personal energy. I can't.
When did this kind of message um, open up for you? When was there that moment that you said, number one, of course, I've got to write this novel, I got to put this down into print, or what have you. But this is important. I need to do something with this.
What's coming to mind right now is a moment where I wasn't the best partner in a relationship, now, like close to 10 years ago. And rather than go into my very familiar shame cycle where I would then, come hard at myself and say, wow, you're a terrible person. You're awful. I can't believe you're like this. The woman that I was with at the time gave me a lot of grace in that moment. And it was in that grace that allowed me to stay with my goodness despite some not so great things that I had done in the moment.
Mm.
And there was something about that grace that was extended me in that moment that allowed me to move out of the cloud of negativity that I had often been using, I think, for a long time to actually avoid my own responsibility. And once that cloud of negativity, which was something I utilized to avoid responsibility, was lifted, I could look at myself and say, oh, I actually don't want to show up in the world like that. That's not who I really am or who I want to be. And it became very clear that I had a lot of blind spots, that there were many ways in which I was insulating myself from my own truth. And I didn't want that for myself anymore. And I think after that experience with my ex-partner, it was a journey that I went down to really uncover some of those blind spots and move towards what I would call my higher self. And that process of moving towards my higher self, which again, I think is a lifelong process. So I'm not saying I'm an expert on this by any means, but that process was then what inspired me to write Captains Wanted.
Mm. We're talking here on this program today about this process of personal growth, and we're doing it through our guest here on the program. And now, do you prefer? Is it Andres or Andre?
Andres. My parents are from Argentina, so it's a Latin name.
Andres, and it is again pronounced Schabelman, Schabelman, Schabelman.
Yeah,
I
Schabelman.
yeah, I struggled through that because I keep wanting to change that. Gallagher, in his comedic style, would often talk
I love
about
Gallagher.
shul. Now, we're not going to school, we're going to shul because that's how it's spelled. And then, of course, all the silent letters. And we're talking about his book, which I think is fascinating. You'll want to get a copy of it. And it is, of course, entitled Captains Wanted, as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host here on Tell Me Your Story, and we're talking with Andy Schabelman, and we're talking about his book, Captains Wanted. Have you been through your own, have you been through personal growth programs, or have you had those periods of time where you said, I'm taking a sabbatical, and it doesn't necessarily mean for a year or 6 months or anything, but just I went in my first marriage. I found out about this monastery north of Phoenix, up on I-17, run by some Catholic nuns, and they had this place opened up where you could go there, and you could stay for however many days you wanted. I did it for a weekend. I went up there on a Friday evening, and I was picked up again on a Sunday. And I took some things with me, but they basically all they gave you was a sheltered place to stay, a bed to sleep on, mattress, so forth. You brought your own food and whatever else you wanted. And it was a time of silence. It was a time of listening to my music because I had one of those little Walkman CD players. It was a time of drawing, which, by the way, I have some of those drawings in my book, Choices. Do you ever take time off like that just to contemplate self?
Yeah, and I dedicate a good portion, not a good portion of my year, but I stay open to different experiences and workshops and conferences and plant medicine ceremonies and different experiences throughout my year to help ground me back into myself and to learn something new and to get a different perspective. So I'd say it's a big part of my life. I go in and out of moments, of course, where I'm, you know, uh, feeling motivated to do those things, and other times I'm more open, and it kind of comes and goes. But generally speaking, I stay open to the right experiences showing up for me. But yeah, I have. I'd say it's a big part of my life.
I'm curious about the use, we talk about this a lot, the use of your intuition.
Mm, yeah, I think it's such an important role in this process of finding discernment. Um, I think intuition can sometimes be used in our society in ways that make it seem so far away and inaccessible, but in reality, it's always there. I have a couple of different emotions or emotional hues that I can kind of feel that I think are more closely associated to my intuition. For me, joy and aliveness is a great source of where my intuition is. If something excites me, and that's a really great example of a direction I should go down. Curiosity is another one. If something it makes me real curious, I'm like, huh, that's interesting. And then the third one is a little bit, I don't know if it's metaphysical, but if something keeps appearing in my life on a consistent basis, like someone, will say, oh, I went to this ceremony, or I tried this modality of healing. And if that kind of modality keeps appearing, or a word like somatics keeps showing up in my
Mm,
in my world, that I'm like, huh, that's probably a sign that I should maybe follow that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and there's certainly some moments when I've been wrong, and in hindsight, I look back in those moments where I didn't have good intuition, and there are some common themes there, like where I wasn't necessarily taking care of my body, where I wasn't taking enough time to come back to my own self and my own energy. And so I do think a lot about how I can optimize my body and my mind in order to be in my most receptive state for my intuition to make itself clear.
What is it that you personally want to? I used to ask this question at the end of every program. I don't ask anymore, so now I can ask it in the middle of the program. Uh, what is your purpose in all of this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow. I think I was like, wow, that's a big one. Um, I think my purpose is to be a vehicle of love in this world, to allow myself to be a vehicle of whatever higher power is out there, to return back to my most purest form, my most honest form, so that in just being and showing up, I can be a part of something greater as I'm intended to be part of that greaterness. And I
Mm.
and so I do sometimes, yes, of course, my ego comes in, and I'm like, I want to be the person that people turn to when they want to remember how important human connection is. Or I want to be the person who reminds people to return to their own self-power and all of those things. And that there's some truth to that. But I think at the core, I really just want to be, I want to be a source of love for others and myself. And I want to show up with my truth and my honesty, and hope that that resonates with others, and that is sufficient and enough for me to be the source of of balance, and that I'm intended to be, and to have that be enough.
Well, it seems to me that that's sort of the process of life that we are all going through too, and that, we're trying to find, we're trying to find out who we are, the proverbial questions of why we're here and where we're going. Um, I wrote a I wrote a song not long ago, 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago,
Hmm.
and it was entitled "I'm a Good Man, Doing the Best I Can."
Yeah.
And then the second line in that chorus is, "Where I'm going is where I'm coming from."
Hmm.
Now, the video with those last two lines shows me where I'm going, and then when I sing where I'm coming from, it's a picture of my parents' family, of
Hmm.
which I was a member. And this was us as little. I probably wasn't more than maybe 5 or 6 years old in the picture, because that's where I come from. What my parents taught me, what my
Hmm.
siblings continue to teach me. Now, my mother's still alive. My father passed 2 years ago, this March 1st.
Hmm.
And I'm still learning from him, because every once in a while I think about some of the things that he taught me in that regard. And it's just to me so fascinating to go through the process um, of self-discovery, looking at and pulling in those examples of the people who have been closest to me. How about you?
Yeah, it's interesting because my parents obviously did a great job in raising me to be self-sufficient and to be kind to others. And I think ultimately that's the main job of a parent. Um, and at the same time, I am well aware that in my family lineage, there is a lot of survival mode pressures that were put on them. And many of the lessons that were passed down come from that place of fear that I was talking to you about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And so while I honor some of the most incredible lessons, and my joy and love of exploration directly comes from my parents, and so many other beautiful qualities. I can also uh, I can also become aware that many of the things that have been imprinted in me came from a time of deep survival mode fear. And it's, I think, partly my job to become the best, fullest, purest expression of myself, to somehow tease out some of those fears so that I can return to an essence that my ancestors didn't really have a privilege to do.
Mm. What about that? Have you ever investigated your ancestry, like through one of these DNA
Oh yeah.
services? And it sort of actually raised more questions for you as to, or maybe it did give you some answers as to, oh, that's the reason why I'm this way, or I look this way, or I'm interested in these things, and da 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 da.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's really I'm 99.6% Ashkenazi Jewish, which means which means that was a lot of effort that was placed on maintaining that, which in many cases, the more that I've uncovered the past, wasn't just a conscious choice, but it was also something that was imposed from the conditions that were in their reality at the time. My great grandparents went to Argentina from this small town in what is now Ukraine called Khotin, and that's on both sides of my family. And if you look at the Wikipedia, just the Wikipedia of that small town, it's not a pretty history. It's
Hmm.
filled with famine and fires and persecution. And this was in the late 1800s. And I think that ancestry really, really shows up in terms of that survival mode instinct. And also, thanks to that, in many ways, I really was pushed to have the highest level of education possible. I went to Harvard and got a graduate school degree from Harvard, which to me doesn't mean so much, but it came from a place of I was really pressured a little bit, into having these success metrics followed because it
Mhm.
was so connected to survival in the past, and kind of undoing that to kind of calm the part of me that when it comes out, and I go, hey, we have the tools to take care of ourselves right now. We have the ability to come back and be safe. We have a home to be safe in. It's okay. But I do feel the energy of that scarcity mindset coming up. I do. And I have to have that conversation consistently with myself. Otherwise, it will take over.
Interesting. Because I'm having those kinds of conversations with myself, especially especially around money.
What's
Um,
your ancestry?
well, it's interesting. I'm predominantly a Native American. Now that's
Mm,
North, Central, and South American. I
mm,
am 1% European Jew.
mm.
I do have Irish and I think a British or English blood. And I'm trying to think of some of the others. And what's interesting is that I have gotten emails from Ancestry saying, we have taken the microscope and we've turned it up. And now we see more detail in your. And so I haven't really gone there and taken a look. But I find it fascinating that I come from a family, a set of parents who were, they weren't frugal, but they were wise with their money. We were middle
Mm-hmm.
class from beginning to end. And I used to think that the neighbors around us were wealthy by comparison. What do I know? I'm a kid. I'm a kid. But it's fascinating to take a look at those things. I love the fact that I know that I've got some Scottish blood in there. This is what I've been told. So I've got Irish and Scottish, which means that I love to drink. I don't like to pay.
That's funny.
It's an interesting it's an interesting dilemma of sorts. We're talking here on the program with Andy, and I'll get this name. I don't want to mess it up. I find it the height of disrespect to mispronounce someone's name. And that's why I should have practiced it more before we started. But it is Schabelman.
Nailed it.
Andy Schabelman is my guest, and you are listening to Tell Me Your Story. We are talking with Andy Schabelman here, Andres Schabelman, if you will. I want to ask you a little bit about that, the Jewish side of you. Not
Hmm.
necessarily, more from a philosophical perspective, okay? In
Mm-hmm.
terms of how has that influenced your life, your thinking process? Because I have to share with you that some of my favorite interviews, and this one notwithstanding, have been with rabbis because I know how much study they go through and the depth of conversation we have is just, I have learned so much from them. But what about were you born, you were obviously born, but were you raised in the Jewish tradition?
Uh, I went to a Jewish camp, and I would go to temple maybe once or twice a year, but it really wasn't a big part of my upbringing. That being said, I grew up amongst a lot of Colombian Catholics in New Orleans, and my mom every Christmas would be asked to do a Hanukkah celebration in the middle of a Christian Christmas celebration, and I was her little helper handing out challah and matzah bread. And she kind of made this mishmash of all the Jewish holidays for this one moment among the Colombian Catholics where we would share Judaism to this group, but in reality at home we weren't really celebrating anything.
Hmm.
And I will say that culturally speaking, more so than philosophically, I do feel affected by my Jewish upbringing because in some ways I was different than the other kids in the South that were, I did like sports and football and that whole Southern thing. It's not that I didn't like it, but I felt like there was I think I had an easier capacity to return back to my emotions because it was accepted a little bit more in that culture than say the like that more white Southern kind of culture that I felt like where the especially the men, I felt like they couldn't really express fully what they were feeling. It wasn't really part of that culture. And so I did feel like maybe it's because of the relationship with the mother in Judaism, you know, like we're mama's boys, or who knows, like there was more of an ability to kind of express emotionally as a man. And I think that has served me, I will say.
That's an interesting conversation to have too, in terms of our arriving at our respective milestones. I and I share this only because I was disappointed in how this turned out. I was hoping that I would get an opportunity to interview Robert Bly, who wrote Iron John, which, by the way, was a book that two of my friends back in Phoenix and I used as our primer for our men's group, of which,
Hmm.
again, there were only three. And when I moved to Santa Barbara, I heard he was coming to town. I put out the request, and I was turned down flat
Hmm.
because he had reached the point where he was tired of answering the same old questions. Well, he hadn't been interviewed by me. Yeah, I might have asked him, so when do we become, when is it that a boy becomes a man and those kinds of things? But we would have gone beyond that to talk about this aspect of masculinity, even if you wanted to go that far to say, okay, well, what's this whole thing about toxic masculinity and on and on and
Mhm.
on. And in 1993, the three of us went up to the lake up north of Phoenix, Woods Canyon Lake, to camp for the weekend. Now, I went up with one of the guys, an elderly gentleman who was a professor, and I had helped him refurbish his fiberglass boat in our driveway. And so we get up there and we have a little tiff. And well, the next morning he has to go down to Mayo Clinic for some medical tests. So I had the place to myself, and it was great. And then our the other guy shows up, and he's got this giant bone-in ham with a big pot and beans and Coke and Coca-Cola and Jack Daniels. So we're having a very nice evening of
Hmm.
food and drinking and talking. And I remember having just seen the movie City Slickers and the scene where the three of them are on horseback riding. And the question by Mitch was asked, so what was your best day? Well, that was my best day.
Hmm.
And when I shared that with my family around the dinner table one evening when we were all together visiting for a holiday or something, I shared that story. And my mother says, well, it's about time. And it wasn't a critical, it's about time. It was just, just her observation. I didn't take anything, it didn't bother me.
Hmm.
But it's the same thing with my brother and I had a conversation. I was sharing with him my philosophies, and he said the same thing to me. Well, Richard, it's about time. To which I responded, Mike, it's not about when you get it, but that you get it. Is there a part of you and or the story, Captains Wanted, which is the title of Andy's book, that addresses the fact that as you are learning how to be your own captain, there is no timetable, that you get where you need to be when you need to get there.
There is. And I purposely didn't make the character's journey to become his own captain a linear journey. There are, you know, there's a part of the book where the character has learned some lessons and he then forgets that lesson in the next part of the book and makes a similar mistake. And I did that purposely to to drive point the home that growth is not a linear process, and it's not about I mean, of course, you might react differently, you might have a different, you might be on a different place on the spiral of growth. But generally speaking, it's not a, it's, I don't think it's helpful to think about it from a time perspective. I think it's helpful to think about it um, as a process of just discovery that occurs somewhat naturally, and then somewhat because it's inspired by your own curiosity and excitement. But yeah, it's definitely not a linear process. And I still make some mistakes that I would have hoped that I would have learned previously and would have gotten myself like over the hump. But I think we have some core lessons in our life that we keep coming back to. And I'm not entirely sure that you'll ever figure it out 100%. And I'm not sure that's the point either. I think it's to move closer to a place of truth and to react from a place of love towards yourself and towards others. But we're not going to get it right 100% of the time. And nor do I think that that's the goal either.
And that's a very good point to make. I did a search and research, if you will, in regards to perfection. I was working for a Christian radio station, hearing all of these different things, and we're sinners and this and that and the other. And then there's this passage in the New Testament that says, "Be ye perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." All right. Well, what the heck does that mean? So I started doing some research. I started to ponder it. I'm thinking, well, God is neither good nor evil, right nor wrong, white or black, and so those kinds of things. The dualism, if you will.
Right.
Back in the Old Testament, there's I think it might be in Psalms or it's other places as well. There's the phrase, "I am that I am." Okay, well, if I take that from the Old Testament and sort of superimpose it over the "Be ye perfect," then that basically means I am perfect. You are perfect because we just are. And that's all we have to be is who we are. And we're perfect. What are
You.
your thoughts in that regard? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. And I love challenging within my own mind the idea of perfection. I remember, another thing in my biography to be proud of is I was one of the first 30 Airbnb employees. And when we were at Airbnb in the early days, we really cared about people having human experiences on the application. Eventually, we really needed to control for the bad experiences, and we also cut out the magical experiences when we did that. But in the early days, when we allowed humans to come together, there were imperfect interactions. There were seamless. There were interactions that were not seamless. There were imperfect. But at the end of the day, the most memorable experiences that the travelers had occurred in situations where life wasn't necessarily perfect or seamless. And so eventually what I saw with the company is, again, to provide an experience that was going to not have so many bad experiences for our guests, we also cut out the top. And we created a very middle of the road experience. Somewhat would call it a perfect or seamless experience. And as we created more of a seamless and perfect experience, people started to care less about us. People started to resonate less with what we were doing. And I think that's an analogy or a metaphor for life, which is that we could try to move towards what we think perfection is, but the reality is that there's no such thing as perfection. That in fact, the mere act of being human means there's going to be messiness and things that don't go according to plan. And yeah, I think that in and of itself is the perfection, right? The perfection is that it's going to be imperfect and messy. And that's also where the joy and the excitement and the aliveness comes from.
What is it that brings you joy in your life?
I really enjoy meeting different people from different walks of life and hearing what kind of lessons they've learned and taking those lessons and applying them in my own life. I get great joy from experiencing different cultures and different perspectives. I've traveled to over 90 countries. I have a travel show online. I get great joy from expressing different characters as an actor or as a comedian and stepping and embodying different energies and roles. I get great joy, thankfully, from my own process of self-discovery and growth. I get great joy from being in a body of water and swimming. I get great joy from walking in a forest with some old trees and birds chirping and the sun every once in a while hitting me on the face. There's a lot of really small things. The feeling after a workout and I shower and I hop into bed is such a great feeling. A cup of coffee in the morning. There's so many things that bring me joy, thankfully, and I'm so thankful that I get to be attuned to them and listen to that part of me, because it's such a great part of being alive.
Well, I have to tell you that I'm excited too about meeting new people. I have trouble walking into a room and not walking around and introducing myself and talking with them and finding out where they're coming from. It's an extraordinary experience. It really is, and I find it can be a lot of fun. I know a lot of people, they not so much. They really don't want to do that. They're shy. They're this. They're that. They're the other. And it's really that's too bad because they're missing out. I take I take I take the message from James Redfield and his Celestine prophecy, where he talks about how we all have messages for one another.
That's right.
And that and I would use the Star Trek analogy of putting up the shields. When the shields go up, all you can do is fight. All you can do is send out the weaponry, but nothing can get in. And it's like, you got to put the shields down because
Totally.
we are here to make a difference. We are here to get to know one another, you know? So I think what you're talking about, I think, is extremely important, that we need to do that. And that's what we are encouraging here. We talk about, community and networking. How do you, how, what's your process in particular? Let's just say you entered a room filled with people. Is there a particular process that you go through because of your own personal curiosity that says, okay, I'm going to go over and talk to this person or that person or the other person? And the reason I asked this question is because I was in a personal growth program and I started looking around, and during the weekend I started associating and I actually, when we first walked in the room, I started looking at different people going, yes, yeah, no, yes, no, no, yes, no. And you know what was really bizarre? It was the no's, the people I had said, no, I don't really want to get to know them. They were the ones I got to know. So I stopped doing that. How about
Right.
you when you walk
Yeah.
into a room or you walk into a store or something like that?
I find recently that I'm not so motivated by the desire to be liked like in the past I used to be. That was a great motivator but for starting conversation. Now I find that there's so much humor in life that shows up in every single moment, that humor to me has become a really great way to like point out when someone's doing something funny, or there's something funny in our just in the room. I'm trying to remember. There was something that happened yesterday that I thought was so funny, and I'm not sure I'm going to remember it. But basically, yeah, it's something about humor that I get drawn to, and I don't really have a filter anymore, because I
Hmm.
just sort of accept that maybe I'm not going to be liked sometimes, and I'm not so, like I said, like hung up on that. So I'll just kind of blurt out what I think is funny, and then that usually leads to a source of connection.
Hmm. So you use humor as your connecting rod, so to speak, or dividing line.
Yeah, because I think people want to laugh and they want to lighten up, and there's so much ridiculousness out in the world, that that I don't know.
There kind of is, and it would be nice if we could all just, I mean, a friend of mine says this all the time. So if we could just all just get along, could we all just get along?
Right.
And there is some truth to that. Absolutely. I couldn't disagree with him on that. We should be able to all just get along, and that's in my humble opinion, that's why we're here.
Totally.
Because if 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 the creator had intended for us at this point, 8.5 billion people, to live on separate independent planets solo, based upon what astronomy is telling us today and science, there are more than enough planets out there for each one of us to occupy one.
Oh,
However,
yeah.
the reality is we're all here together.
That's right. And I do really believe that the end goal, I mean, as I go through the process myself of my own self-work and self-discernment and sovereignty path, as I go down that journey, I return to humans and I return to unity and I return to connectedness because we're all essentially kind of not, I don't like to say that we're the same because I think that takes away some of our own uniqueness. But at the end of the day, like what I see in you is a part of what is inside of me. And, the judgments that I might have of you are judgments that I have of myself. The things that I see in you that I'm proud of or that I see as attributes, it's likely that I have that inside of me.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think the more that I become attuned to what's happening inside of me, the more that I'm attuned to the way that I'm reflecting myself onto others and how other people are reflecting back onto me. And that just makes me want to be surrounding myself with others because it feels good and I can learn more for myself. And I feel like I can be of service to others as well, just by being me.
Captains Wanted. It's a novel by Andres Schabelman, and you, my friends, are listening to Tell Me Your Story. Andres Schabelman, my guest, and Andres, I want to thank you so much for being a part of what we're doing here, trying to change the world, one program at a time, one guest at a time, although we've had 3 and 4 at the same time in a collective Zoom meeting, as it were. I do miss in-studio interviews. However, there are a lot of guests that I would not be interviewing, such as yourself, if it weren't for the technology that we have today. And I think that technology in this context is being used by a lot of people for a lot of good. And I thank you for the good that you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate all the good you're doing.
People can get a copy of your book, I'm sure, through Amazon.com. Is that correct?
All the platforms that you can get books on, you can get them. And follow me along also on my Instagram, which is Schabelmania. That's also my YouTube and my TikTok. And there's a lot of great content there. And I'd be honored to have people follow my journey.
I like that. Schabelmania. That's
right.
cool. I like that.
Thanks.
Well, we will talk, of course, also about getting your book recorded one way or the other, because I think it would be a wonderful read. I used to listen to, as a legally blind young man, talking books and recordings for the blind, and long before Audible was ever around. I've even recorded back in '82 a book by Og Mandino called "The Greatest Miracle in the World," and it is reading. Okay, don't let anybody tell you any different, folks. It is still reading. Well, we've had with us here on the program Andy, or Andres Schabelman, and he once again is a self-described multi-hyphenated troublemaker, and we're so glad that he's making trouble here on Tell Me Your Story. I have 3 final questions for you, and I will ask those. Folks, I hope that you will go to Amazon or any of the other outlets to get a copy of his book, which once again is Captains Wanted. I wouldn't be surprised if the ad didn't look like something in the classified section of the newspaper. Oh, you don't know what a newspaper is? Google it. Look it up. Okay. My first question to you is, who is Andres Schabelman?
I'm just a guy trying to be the best version of myself.
What is it that gets you up in the morning?
Um, the the unknown, unpredictable excitement of just being human.
And finally, what was your best day?
Mm, my best day was today.
Wonderful. Well, again, I thank you so much for joining us here on the program, and I look forward to having you back again to converse further about all of these different subjects that we've talked about.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal. Jeanette, I'm still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.